The YouTube algorithm will have to get used to the fact that I'm going to say the name Adolf Hitler a lot in this video, for educational purposes. Because let me be clear, I'm not a fan. Welcome back to A Kid Explains History. It's been a while since I've made a video, and as you can see, I'm not really a kid anymore. In fact, I moved to New York City and attend Columbia University, so thank you to everyone who supported this channel over the last 10 years. Way back in the beginning, this little guy made a YouTube video on World War II and compared Adolf Hitler to Darth Vader. Now, I stand by that characterization, but I want to go back into a little bit more detail. Specifically, I want to talk about how democracy can disappear, not because of an invasion or a war, but because people let it happen. This was the story of Germany in the 1930s, but it still happens around the world today. And the tactics haven't changed much, because unfortunately, they work really well. Let's start in the 1920s. Germany had just lost in World War I, and the country was in big trouble. They were forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which we did a video on. Long story short, it forced them to pay a lot of money and take blame for the war. This made the Germans angry, embarrassed, and broke. Their democracy, the Weimar Republic, was new and fragile. There were elections, political parties, and a free press, but none of it felt like it was working. Many Germans wanted someone to restore the country to greatness. Into that mess stepped a man with big promises and zero respect for the rules. He didn't offer solutions. He offered someone to blame. The Jews, the communists, immigration, the elites, journalists. In fact, he called the media the Lügenpresse, or lying press. And people listened. Because when things feel out of control, it's a lot more comforting to think that all of your problems are someone else's fault. So who was Adolf Hitler? Well, he was a failed art student, a World War I Lance Corporal, and a very bitter man. Soon after the war, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, aka the Nazis, and quickly became their loudest voice. Despite their name, the Nazis were never on the left. They were always a far-right party. Now, a lot of political parties in Germany at the time had their own street armies. The Nazis were no different, and theirs was called the SA, or Brown Shirts. They were led by this guy, a former soldier named Ernst Röhm. In 1923, the Nazis attempted to take over the state Bavarian government in an insurrection called the Beer Hall Push. Spoiler alert, it failed, but only just. Hitler was arrested and sent to prison, and in that time he wrote a book, Mein Kampf. He also decided to rethink his strategy. Instead of using violence, he planned to win power legally, to use democracy's norms and rules to destroy it from within. By 1928, the Nazis were a small party in the Reichstag, or German parliament. They only had 12 seats. All of that changed after the US stock market crashed in 1929, leading into the Great Depression. A lot of Germans lost their jobs, businesses closed, everyone was scared, and Hitler's message started to work a lot better. In the next election, the Nazis got 107 seats. Hitler was now starting to get a small but incredibly devoted following. You could even call it a cult. In 1932, he ran for president against the incumbent, 84-year-old war hero Paul von Hindenburg. Now, he lost, but he had a good showing. Germany's leaders didn't like Hitler, but they were tempted by the idea of using his movement for themselves, rather than fighting it. A succession of chancellors like Heinrich Brüning, Kurt von Schleicher, and Franz von Papen schemed and betrayed each other to keep Hitler and the communists out of power, but that only made each of them weaker. By January 1933, Papen convinced Hindenburg to make Hitler the new chancellor, in hopes to break the gridlock. They thought they could control him. It was the best way to box him in. With help from his chief propagandist Joseph Goebbels, Hitler began to perpetually campaign. He spread his speeches and message through the radio, which was a new technology of the time. Kind of like social media today, it allowed for mass communication with regular people. And at that same time, the SA was still on the streets, picking fights with anyone who opposed Hitler, especially the communists. The trick was to cause chaos and then promise to stop the chaos, as if you were an arsonist and a fireman at the very same time. Many people in Germany began to believe that Hitler and Hitler alone could solve their problems. Just 6 days before the 1933 election, the Reichstag building was set on fire, and the Nazis blamed the communists, though there's a good chance they set that fire themselves. I guess they're taking the arsonist and firefighter thing a little too literally. Either way, it was the perfect time for a power grab, and Hitler signed the Reichstag fire decree with the approval of Hindenburg. It immediately suspended a lot of civil rights. No freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, and the police could arrest anyone at any time. The Reichstag fire decree was completely legal. The Nazis said they needed these temporary powers to figure out what the heck was going on. Spoiler alert, it wasn't temporary. But despite all we've mentioned, when Election Day rolled around, Hitler didn't get a majority. In fact, in his entire democratic political career, he never won one. The Nazis knew that in order to gain complete control, they needed to then pass an enabling act. That was a totally constitutional law that would allow Hitler to make any law without the approval of the Reichstag, though it needed a 2/3 majority to pass, something that political analysts believed was an impossibility. If you followed the rules. Instead, to pass the bill, the Nazis banned the communists and opposition leaders from voting, bribed and threatened the rest, and stationed SA guards all around the building during the vote. Because of these tactics, it passed, 444 to 94. The scariest part? This wasn't a military coup. It was all done within a legal framework. But democracy was over in Germany. All opposition political parties were banned. So Hitler was a dictator at this point, but he wasn't an absolute dictator. There was still one major problem. The army. Hindenburg was still president, and a popular one at that. The army was loyal to him, not Hitler. And they had some problems with the Nazis. The SA's leader, Ernst Röhm from earlier, kind of wanted to replace the German army. And despite the Enabling Act, Hindenburg still had the power to declare martial law to put a stop to the Nazis. This was probably Hitler's most vulnerable time. The time when the establishment could have said, enough is enough. In fact, Hitler's vice-chancellor made a speech saying he should start giving up powers. And threats were beginning to trickle out from Hindenburg's office, suggesting that the president was thinking about martial law. The message was loud and clear. If Röhm and the SA weren't handled, Hindenburg would hand the government over to the army. But this is one of those crucial points in history. Thinking about doing something, saying you're going to do something, threatening that you'll do something, is not the same as doing something. And at the end of the day, the only person who truly acted here was Adolf Hitler. On June 30th, 1934, he launched a surprise attack, not on his enemies, but on his own side. Ernst Röhm and dozens of others were killed in the Night of the Long Knives, which is a very mythological and fancy way to say cold-blooded murder. Some were killed for political reasons, some weren't even the SA, and others were just secretaries who got in the way. A month later, the isolated, now 86-year-old President Hindenburg died of cancer. Instead of holding an election to replace him, Hitler just merged the presidency and chancellorship into one, naming himself Führer. The army then swore a personal oath of loyalty to him on August 2nd, 1934. That was it. The game was over. And like I said earlier, these tactics are shockingly effective. Attack the press, encourage violence, and then call for law and order. Say elections are fake unless you win. George Lucas wrote a line in the Star Wars prequels. This is how democracy dies, to thunderous applause. If people do nothing, it can fade. One excuse, one emergency, one broken norm at a time. Thanks for watching. And remember, history isn't just a bunch of old stories. Its lessons are living, breathing things. And if you care about the future, it's our job to learn from them. I'm Mr. Q. Thank you for learning alongside me these past 10 years. And until we meet again,